Here's the process for making weighted decisions, which is one more technique for making solid life choices. We've discussed making decisions based on black and white numbers, which are kind of easy because it's just a numerical comparison. We've discussed adding in the emotional components, either at the beginning as a constraint or at the end as an understanding of the cost of the emotional benefit. Weighted decisions are a way to combine both the objective and the emotional criteria that you're looking for into one more objective decision-making process. The basic concept is you're assigning a weighting to each of your criteria, both logical and emotional, and then you evaluate each of the options based on those for a final weighted score that tells you your best choice. First, let's go back to the decision we had from a previous video about how to decide what we want to eat for dinner. Now remember, this is a hypothetical situation with hypothetical numbers from my perspective, just to illustrate the process. The first step is to list out the criteria or value drivers, whatever you want to call the things that are important to you in this decision. Now, one of the first items is always going to be cost, so let's just include that right off the bat. Another factor is going to be the quality of the food, how good of a meal it is, how good it tastes. Another factor might be how healthy is the meal. Another criteria might be the distance to this restaurant. How far am I going to have to drive to get there? While we're on the subject of the effort I have to put in, another might be how nice of a restaurant is it in terms of how much work do I have to do cleaning up and getting dressed up? Do I have to shave or not before I go to this restaurant? And then one more criteria will be how fun is the experience? How much fun is it going to be to go to this restaurant versus sitting here? You'll notice that this is a list of combined logical and emotional components. Some of them are about how much do they conserve our time, money, and health, and others are just what we want, what we feel like. Now that we have the criteria listed out, the next thing is a little bit more obscure, but we want to assign weighting to each of these criteria for how important each of these items are to us. And the goal is that all the weightings add up to 100%. So let's say that cost isn't as important to me because I saw my pimp last week and I got a handful of cash. So maybe cost is 10% of the weighted equation. I am looking for a good meal though, so I'm going to put 20% weighting on the quality of the food. Normally I'd be more concerned about how healthy the meal is, but we'll say today's a bit of a splurge day. I'm only going to assign 5% to healthy. Maybe it's 5:30 and traffic is bad. I really don't feel like driving in a lot of traffic, so I'm going to put 20% on the distance. Dressing up is something that can go either way. There may be times where we want to go someplace where we dress up, though I can't really remember the last time I had that thought. But let's say today I don't feel like spending the 3 minutes it takes me to do a shower, so I'll just put 15% for this item. And what's left? Well, we've already assigned 70%, which means that we now have 30% on the fun factor. That feels a little bit high though. That means that that's the driving factor, and I can't say that as I look at these, that is the most important thing. So let's go back and change a couple of these. I'm going to go back and put quality at 30%, healthy at 10%, and now fun becomes 15%. That seems to make sense to me. That feels right. And it's always better to do these adjustments on the front side if you can to help build trust in your decision at the end of the process. Now that we have our criteria and we have our weightings, the next step is to establish our options. Now, there are tons of options in the area for where I can get a meal. However, I don't want to spend the time going through all this calculations for every one of those options. So I'm going to do option filtering, which means I'm going to start with this mass of every option possible, and I'm going to quickly narrow it down to 4 options that sort of sound good to me right at this moment. The first one is going to be the Schlotzsky's drive-thru. The second one will be Pizza Hut delivery. The third one will be Saltgrass, which is a local steakhouse. And the fourth one will be Ruth's Chris, which is a very high-end steakhouse. And I'm specifically talking about the Ruth's downtown on the Riverwalk, which is a little bit more fun because you're down at the river, you can sit outside, etc. The next step is to assign scores for each of the options in each of the criteria. Now, what I do is I assign 1 through 5 for each of these. If you're familiar with the Likert scale, it's something on that order. I put 1 through 5 where 5 is the most favorable or desirable score and 1 is the least desirable of the options. So you're not going to end up with all of them being 5s. You're going to grade them relative to each other. You're also not ranking them. In other words, it's not order 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say for cost. Cost is actually higher at Ruth's Chris than it is Pizza Hut. But the cheaper cost is more desirable. So Pizza Hut and Schlotzsky's are going to get 5s because those two are the cheapest options. And then it's relative out to there, where 1 goes to Ruth's because it's the most expensive. And then Saltgrass is kind of in the middle, so it gets a 3. We go down the list and we assign the scores in each of the criteria for each of the options. Obviously, things like cost are a little bit easier because there's numbers behind it. Things like fun or how much you have to dress up. All these things are a little bit more obscure, but you can, assign scores based on what it feels like, for lack of a better way of saying it. The point is we're trying to give it real thought as we go through the process to, again, help us trust the decision at the end. Now we go through our scores, we take it times the weighting for each of those, and we get our weighted scores, which gives us totals for each option. And in this case, we get a 3.25 for Saltgrass, which makes it the winner. The weighted decision process makes our lives easier and more efficient. We put in our criteria, we assign weighting, we put in our options, we put in the scores, and the math does the rest and tells us what is the best choice based on what we've told the Excel sheet. However, it only works if we trust and accept the choice at the end. So if we get to the end, we may look at it and say, well, Ruth's isn't that far off from Saltgrass. I really just feel like having Ruth's at the end, and I'm going to choose that, which is fine. But the more you can trust the process and do what it tells you, the more efficient and easier your life will be. I mentioned option filtering a little bit earlier when I talked about all the different restaurants and narrowing them down so that I only had to go through the work of evaluating a short list of options. We talked about how at the end, you can look at it and say, well, I don't really feel like Saltgrass. Maybe I want Ruth's tonight. That's fine. What's less fine that I've dealt with a couple times where I've been assisting different people in trying to make decisions is when you have no trust in the process whatsoever and you can't get out of your own way. In one case, I was helping with logo design for somebody and we had these ideas, and obviously, as you can imagine, in something artistic, there were all these different themes, let's call it, for the design. And what I was trying to do is say, okay, there's a quick sketch, there's a more detailed sketch, then there's an actual logo, and then you start dealing with, colors and final whatever. What I was trying to help the person do is say, okay, let's rule out some of these that maybe you don't like, and then let's take, a few more down here. Maybe we add one along the way. And eventually, you get down to where you've only got a couple and you filter down through the options so that the only one you're really putting all this work into a final design is something like this. The problem was we tried this, and what happened is instead of a nice funnel, the individual wanted to then go back up to some of these that we'd X'd out before and take these down. And so instead of a nice funnel, what you end up with is rabbit holes, and your decision process ends up looking more like the golf course at the end of Caddyshack. In another case, I was trying to help guide somebody through a car buying process. So again, we started with all these options, and I was looking for ways to narrow the list through option filtering. And what we did is we said, okay, let's get rid of the EVs. We talked about it. We talked about the pros and cons. We even talked to a third-party car sales guy who backed up what I'd already tried to express, and we slowly got down to where we only had 2 options left, and those were the 2 to be driven and tested and see which one she wanted. Unfortunately, a few days later, Did the same thing. Right back up to, what do we think about this EV? Commitment can be a very scary word, I get it, but a tool is only as good as the user. The process works if you let it. In both of those cases I just mentioned, it just drove me insane to have done what I thought was a good job of helping decide on an option filtering, evaluating, coming up with some good choices, and in both cases it got flipped on its head right back to the beginning. And I've attempted to try to understand why people do this or what I could do different in the process to help them avoid this. Perhaps there were hesitations to just trusting themselves and trusting the process for a final decision. Maybe there's a fear of regret if they don't spend a painstaking amount of time uncovering every potential rock on the way. Or maybe it's a feeling of they didn't decide it, but a spreadsheet did, and there's hesitation with that. I don't really know. While not being able to come up with any real good reason or solution for the problem, I only want to bring it up as a caution and let you know that it's a potential pitfall in the decision-making process, depending on your personality and how you view things. Just something to keep in the back of your head. If you want the process to work, you have to let it work for you. If you haven't done so, please click the link below to subscribe to the channel. Click the little bell for alarms when new videos come out. Check out the YCC merch store to see if there's anything you like, and let's use casual sense.